Good morning, everybody. It's even earlier where I am. It's such an honor to be here among friends and people who've had such an incredible influence on my creative life. Lots of heroes here, and lots of collaborators. Yesterday, I was really loving the through thread narratives of people's creative and technical lives. So I thought I'd play a little bit with that and start there. So when I was a graduate student, I was not headed towards this kind of directing lab. Oh, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Caitlin Fisher. I direct the Immersive Storytelling Lab at York University in Toronto, Canada. I also direct the Augmented Reality Lab there. I chair the Department of Cinema and Media Arts, and I'm also the president of the Electronic Literature Organization. And so deep roots in the kind of discussions that we're having here and deep investments. When I was a graduate student, I discovered a couple of things happened that led me to this room. And the first was the discovery of interactive CD-ROMs. So obviously Eastgate, and thinking about hypertext as an epistemological challenge to the academy. So moving beyond the linear page was something I found utterly compelling, and it changed the entire direction of my career. And it was probably because my notes looked like this. So it was only a short route to ending up with a dissertation in story space, so where everything started to look like this. And oh, hang on, I've managed to lose my notes. Hang on here, I've managed to.
Caitlin, was there sound attached to that?
No, there isn't sound attached to that. I'm just wondering what's happened to my speaker notes.
Do you need to mirror your computer? If you're using a Macintosh, you can go into your settings, click the mirror function.
I can try to click the mirror function here. I'm actually on a new computer where I don't actually have the mirror here. It's fine, although weird. Let me just give me 1 second, and I'll just see if I can fix this in Keynote. And if I can't, then whoops, hang on here. There we go. Okay, so this is in many ways the political and creative project of my life as it intersects with the future of text. So, okay, sorry. Apologies, everybody. So back to where my slides are supposed to be. So in 2000, but around in the early 90s, I started writing what ended up being the first born digital dissertation in Canada that was defended in 2000. And it was originally written in story space and then flattened into HTML. I started the project, I think, in 93, and I had really brilliant supervisors who didn't know much about hypertext, who encouraged me or kind of forced me to create giant boxes of foam back cards. I linked them with wire. I made mobiles. I created crowded rooms filled with text. At one point, I had my entire back bedroom. We were talking when we were having coffee this morning with Dina Larson, that was really resonant with her story about trains and hypertext and around putting stories in little carts. And so I was drawn in those early days to interface epistemologies and really the political as well as creative possibilities of these new forms. If I'd had funding at the time, I see in rear view that this was really, that my first large-scale hypertext work, the dissertation, really should have been a knowledge domain visualization. That was the ultimate intent behind it. And yeah, it's kind of my great regret that it wasn't really concretized that way. And now that I'm working increasingly in VR now, I feel like I should throw it into Unity and do a link node hypertext, an interactive and immersive piece. The dissertation was called Building Feminist Theory Hypertextual Heuristics, and it used hypertext to build forms, or argued that we could build forms resonant with knowledges that challenge the philosophical line. And so that's why the slide is at first glance, this doesn't look like philosophy. I think of a lot of the work I do, not just the early hypertext, but the work in XR, in virtual reality environments, as being fundamentally around how we engage with knowledge and each other. And the kind of poetry that moves us beyond instrumental thought, that these are actually questions that are intimately connected to even some of the discussions we're hearing around having, AI generation and regurgitation machines. And what does it mean to be able to think yourself outside of culture? I think of AI generators as these incredible ciphers that allow us to see dominant culture. Very, very difficult problem to think and create outside of it. And I see it as a springboard to that rather than a barrier to that. In the 90s, I was also inspired really by visualizations at the Smithsonian. Yeah, I was really lucky I graduated when I did, because even as I defended, new rules were coming through our Faculty of Graduate Studies that specified font and margin size for digital dissertations. But I learned an awful lot about working with the sculptural qualities of the piece. And really at that time, what I was interested in was the architecture of initially the story space, but then the HTML, really the constellation of ideas held aloft by this technology. And I think that was the part that 20 years ago, people couldn't readily see. I was like very sort of like Adorno at that point, like unlocking the philosophical concept with like many, many keys rather than a single key. And that's what hypertext enabled me to do. And then later, it actually was made even more profoundly interesting by working spatially. After that, though, when people really didn't get the initial work and couldn't see that initial constellation, I made works that were character-driven, friendlier pieces, and I resisted for a long time making works that were really aligned with some of my deeper interests. But I had the great fortune of visiting the Brown Cave after I finished this fairly straightforward piece of hypertext, and it was really revelatory. In the Brown Cave, the idea that you could be inside the cave, and I think the day that I was there, they were showing cave painting, which had been created by an MA student, again, probably 1998, 1999, but the idea that you could create inside a virtual reality environment, and that this was an incredibly, like it was a revelatory expressive tool to me to be able to work like that, and it changed the entire trajectory of my career. And now, I can be in my living room with something like Tilt Brush and do the same thing, but then you needed $1 million cave and $1 million idea. The work I do now is less text-based than it was back then. So I teach a course called Future Cinema, not a course called Future Text, for example. But I've also been really challenged to say, how do we bring text into these kinds of environments? I often bring it in as voiceover. I struggle with the place of the physical text itself, but I realized as I was thinking about this symposium that all through my work, I have pieces of text. I have thought about the ways in which the text itself as this kind of mediating system and sort of desiring machine end up in my work, often as ephemera, but sometimes as text to actually walk through. The slide you're seeing here is actually my first lab, the AR lab, and it was really a collaboration with Georgia Tech. It was a twin to one of the labs there, an incredible generosity that they would share the ideas of building the lab with me. At that time, I had some of the most expensive tracking system in a fine arts context anywhere in the world. And now, we can do it on our phones. So it's kind of interesting. But what I learned in that space, moving beyond the flat screen to all of a sudden having a room, was that you lose so much as an author and you gain so much as an author. When stories, I'd been really fascinated with the way that hypertext could expand my idea of how to create stories and how readers moved within them, and moving to physical spaces challenged that once more. But this room in particular was a huge challenge because the technology wasn't there yet. We had like really clunky VR headsets with like giant tethered ropes. We had to have grad students like holding them, like they were like bridesmaids holding like a large dress. But we always at that time thought about the kinds of future forms that more ideal technology would enable. So all of these moments were ways of thinking about futures of text that might not be possible given existing technologies. And that's something that we did. So this screen here shows, some of the work that ended up in VR, but you can see there's like a little text piece floating there. I tried to get better shots of this. This is like an ancient piece, Cardamom of the Dead, but there are rooms that are entirely text-based here. And I think ultimately, I mean, I think of text as always having this this incredible invitation that text itself has a sensuality, that working at scale, that walking through large scale, either images of text or words themselves. I like hearing voiceovers as well as engaging with textual objects. I've been really interested in using hand tracking technologies so you feel like you're picking things up or not. And I love to create inside these spaces, writing directly into the environment. And so I think in that way that some people, I know I teach a lot of people who argue that you're pulled very much outside of the fictional world, that this kind of interactivity is super distracting. But I think going back to my earlier investments in future of text and moving away from the philosophical line and narrative closure, that's something that has never really bothered me. The idea of creating, I like inciting that still create some pleasure for audiences, but it's not the deal breaker for me. I love my body moving through text. I love holding small XR objects as sculptures. And then one of the things we used to do all the time in the lab is throw it back up into the trackers and walk through the same story and think about the way in which our relationships to our body changes the story. Pretty much platform agnostic.
What you can do is you bring.
Can you hear that?
Closer.
That's my daughter when she was little. This is some of the software that before Unity came by, before there were easy XR things, we just created a lot of our own software, drag and drop, because my other investment is making it really easy for poets and writers to start to work in these environments.
You can get a different picture.
Yeah, so easy enough for kids to make. And that was the basis of a lot of our work that came later. So like 2008, Andromeda, these were really proof of concepts. But I love to repurpose sort of dollar store books. And I guess, you know, the idea of invoking book objects so people open a book and kind of know what they're going to do. And I realized that I was looking through here that there were a number of places. I mean, remember, this is 2008, but I've got like my little Star Wars thing going on here, all through incorporated multiple voiceovers, different scale, video, and text inside these early AR pieces. So you could actually read, and often the piece that you're able to read on text is actually slightly, the juxtaposition is supposed to sort of challenge some of the text you're hearing.
This isn't a book.
I did a
This is
lot of
cycle
work
connected
on
short stories that you
looking
can
at
hold in
AR
your
and
hand
granularity,
controlled
how
with the
you would
help
have
of your
haunted
webcam and
objects,
computer.
how you could
Granularity
use these in different kinds of spaces. So
with opportunities for customization, including scale, story levitation, and story positioning in the real world.
Yeah.
Your reading kit includes
I love the
stickers, a
idea of
file that
creating
will print out an
architectures for
infinite
people to
number of marker
repurpose at
sets
home so
on
they
this
could
work,
work in XR
suggested
and create
physical
their
objects,
own
one background,
spatialized
one pair of underwear.
environments. And continued this practice, sometimes losing actual text.
Okay, it's fine now. It's just the video is a bit louder than you, but now that the video sounds.
Sorry, yeah, I kind of got that. I'll move along from it, but yeah, thank you for that. I'll try to be more mindful of that. And it wasn't that important. I was just trying to speak over it. So a lot of these experiments later just only had voice or only had moving images and these early things, but often did return to text. I would say one of the things that came out of this too were tiny handheld worlds. So some of them on the carriage on the right was an actual, you know, it was a poem that had been a print poem that was turned entirely into a series of sort of spatialized stanzas. But we also used these as tiny little XR storytelling devices that often had a lot of text. Some of them, we had a series called Augmented Reality Freedom Stories that our lab did in collaboration with the Harriet Tubman Center. And these often had a lot of text, sometimes hard to read, but the idea was there that you'd have these kind of jewel boxes of historical documents and original narration. I'll go faster now. in my first large-scale VR piece that I did in Unity, I don't know when, but it was like too long. I called it like a VR novella rather than a VR thing. I thought of it as kind of like novella, almost novel length. It was way too long for VR. But again, sort of imagining a future of text beyond, you know, the latency problems at the time in which it was written. And I realized that in this piece, I actually had a number of rooms that, I think if I've got some video here, that actually did contain text. I had trouble finding them because part of the rooms were broken, but there were rooms that that part of the story really did hinge on finding certain pieces. And some of the rooms that you'd walk through like this. I did a number of pieces that challenged the idea of the book itself and tried to use XR as a form to like make the book come alive in particular ways.
Storyline which doesn't
and again,
involve
some
my
of these-
throwing up on the great goose duvet, the 18th century marble dresser, my peach nightgown, throwing up even into the eyelets of the pillowcase on.
So sort of challenging the idea of what people expected from print, but some of these, and I didn't capture it here, some of them were poems that actually had text that went deep into the interior of the pages. And some of them, again, this piece in particular had textual clues about what was going on in this particular story, the castle, and you have triazepam for sleeplessness. So if you don't read, you might not get the whole story. Most recently, when I was thinking about future of text, really fascinated by using XR in different kinds of ways. And I worked with the Canadian Film Centre this summer. We filmed at the Immersive Storytelling Lab at Cinespace in the volumetric studio, and we worked with the Griffin Poetry Trust to bring 4 award-winning Griffin poets in. We filmed them in volumetric video. And then turned it into an XR experience. I thought it was interesting. The final treatment of this wasn't uniquely mine. This was the final collaborative project, but that one of the things that seemed to be important was to signal the kind of the textuality and the written word behind some of these performances. So I'll show you just a tiny bit of. So this is
curious humans.
This is Margaret
what
Atwood,
song
sort of
we
just
sang
on a piece
to
of paper
lure so
in
many
front of the
sailors
Louvre.
to their deaths, granted, but what sort of death? I mean, sharp bird claws in the groin, a rending pain.
Whoops, hang on. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off Margaret Atwood. I thought I could. I wanted to
Such
just get to the
curious
end of the.
humans, wondering what song we sang to lure so many sailors to their deaths, granted, but what sort of death? I mean, sharp bird claws in the groin, a rending pain, fanged teeth in the neck, or a last breath exhaled in bliss, like that of male praying mantises.
We're going to have to cut Margaret Atwood, I'm afraid, because it's 20 minutes and we should get a bit of Q&A because this is really.
Okay, just one moment. What I wanted to show you. So I just wanted to say part of the future is co-creating inside VR. Sorry about that. I also had a number of AI generated images that I was doing yesterday or for another conference. So it's AI generated text and an AI generated arcade. And then yesterday during the coffee breaks, I just thought I'd make this quickly for us because now the things that used to take forever are super fast. So I just threw this into Adobe Aero, a number of texts. You can, I just put this out in my backyard last night. You could walk through them. This is literally a 10-minute experience or a 10-minute creative moment. It's super fast. And if you wanted to just have it in your rooms right now, you could just use the QR code and you could have this. It's not particularly a story, but I guess my point is that the future of text, it's more collaborative, it's faster, the tools are better, that the future is networked. It will be about human and AI together, I think, yeah, and that there are ways that there are a lot of connections between moving from print pages into hypertext, into space, and into XR. Thanks.
Thank you. We will squeeze in 1 or 2 questions. Sorry, probably end of this your time. Any questions or comments? Obviously online too. While you're all thinking, the live transcription is pretty gosh darn amazing, isn't it? It's just an example of machine learning that has quietly become functional. So when we're looking at some of these much more advanced things, they're going to be just as functional and just as ambient soon. So it's kind of amazing. Yeah, thank you very much. That was very inspirational, but there's got to be a question or two. We're waiting on a coffee break here, but Scott still has a comment, which is good.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for a great, that was such a great tour of 20 years of your work and in 15 minutes. I was wondering to kind of come back a little bit to think from these waves of girls to this. Do you think that sort of long form narrative fits very well into your way of thinking about VR? And maybe can you tie it just a little bit to your thinking that goes back 20 years about multilinear hypertext?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think increasingly, I mean, I have a huge allegiance to long form, even when long form doesn't work, even when the granularity of everything I did, you know, like the chunks were too big, the thing was too long. I think that is coming future form, and that's really a technological limitation. I also have a greater investment in augmented versus virtual reality. I think there are going to be different stories told in uniquely digital environments, and the kinds of hardware and software that I believe will be coming that would enable sort of like an AR long form story, a palimpsest across the world. We would have stories that you could inhabit for long times. It's not about attention. People can game and binge watch TV for like 10 hours at a time. I think the possibility of what kind of story would be interesting enough, if you think about dreaming, if you dream yourself beyond the current limitations of technology and this intermediate form of like the phone that we're using, if you imagine what kind of story you could have as persistent in its space and maybe a collaborative environment, you're going to have long form. I think that a lot of the things of, you know, people wanting things, you know, just a tiny proof of concept or 30 seconds and there's no more attention, or thinking about virtual and augmented reality as more like gallery practices where you can just like swift and go on by. Those are moments in time, and the future of the form can definitely be long form if the writing is there. So I really encourage, and I think we're getting a lot, like in my program, a lot of students who can think and write clearly around massive game environments. We talked yesterday about people who probably spent a lot of time, collaboratively creating textual worlds in the 90s. This kind of thing will be much easier and can take place in virtual environments. We are already now, we hold meetings inside Multibrush. We co-create together and spend, long periods of time. So I think those of you who are novelists, your time is coming, and yeah, so we'll see. I mean, right now, the devices aren't there, but I think they're coming.
So thank you. We're going to have a coffee break now until 40 past the hour, depending on what time zone you are. Fiddle a little bit with this machine to make sure we have enough storage for the recording. So I'll turn off video for a second. But obviously, for those of you who aren't running to the bathroom or coffee, please continue chatting.
Dina?
Yep,
Dina?
I'm here.
Can you hear me? I'm going to go back to sleep for just a little while.
Yeah, you need to.
Today, so I'm not, after this is over, I go straight to campus, so I've got to be there till 7. So I'm going to go lay down a little bit with my cat, and I'll be back.
Yeah, please rest. Please rest and make sure you're okay for the day.
I forgot to say, the fact that you guys are in the middle of the night, no words.
I would be there physically if I could possibly be there physically. I wanted to be there, so this is my showing how much I wanted to be there. So I'll see you guys in a little bit. Thank you.
I just dropped a link in the chat to an amazing video on YouTube showing a short indie sci-fi being done with Blender and the subtle use that makes the background text to create the illusion of it being a real alternate world.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Yeah, I'm also going to, for the folks who came in a little bit later, drop the chat in the chat. We had the 14-minute video from Mez that is well worth watching. The background images are stunning, and I wish she had said whether or not all of those background images were created with her and collaboration with the artificial intelligence, with the
They
AI
all look like
generators.
Mid-Journey, I think. They had that
Okay.
feel. I mean, that's the other thing that's
And-
interesting. We're going to start to have signature styles. Like, can you tell if it's an Unreal Engine or Unity? Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Is it
And
is it in DALL-E or is it in Mid-Journey? They have signature styles. So
it'd be so cool to have a list of all of these types of tools and how to use them. Like, I know Judy Malloy was doing this whole thing about technology used with different artists. That would be amazing to have.
one of the things that we had, so I'm in like the final year of an AI storytelling project funded by SSHRC. And one of the things that we were doing with GPT-2 was originally prompting GPT-2. It would spit out something, say 200 or 500 words, feed those into DALL-E 1, and then you'd get an image. And you could also work it backwards, or you could take like an image of something and prompt that picture in. Anyway, it was very, very fun, but not great. I mean, it was more theoretically interesting, but I also think that that's one of the loops that would be very fun for creativity. And that's also why I think we're going to go longer form. Not longer isn't necessarily better. I do mostly handcrafted stuff, and I'm kind of afraid of like the endless, like the AI that can go on forever. But we're going to have longer stuff because people are going to have different kinds of relationships to writing.
Well, and that was actually my question to you, Caitlin, in the chat. You had said something very briefly off the cuff about the text was too long here. And I was like, wait a minute, what's the role for longer narratives within an XR environment? And how would that work? And I agree with you. There is the attention span. We just have to figure out how.
Well, one of the things I think has been really hard is that inside like existing tools, if you have like a lot of people who will get immediately nauseous, or when you have latency problems where you turn your head and the headset doesn't quite follow, you can't keep people in there a long time. But these are technological problems. I mean, some of them might be at root. Sometimes, people's some people might maybe never get over that kind of sickness being inside virtual environments, but these get better all the time. So it can go long if it's interesting enough. But I think also then you have to learn to write differently, right? And I think about this also in terms of the future cinema class. You give up point of view editing. You give up so many of the tools that we understand make for compelling experiences that people actually like. And as a writer, you also, this, right? I mean, you give up some things and you gain other tools when you move from, say, print to hypertext. It's the same thing as you move from flat screen to immersive. You gain so much. And I think as writers, these are not things that are necessarily taught to us, like the importance of spatialized sound, the idea of how you move people from corner to corner. And maybe, in the early days, it was kind of like maybe they all have to be a mystery. Maybe they all have to be a treasure hunt. Like I didn't come from gaming. I didn't know how you move people through a space. And now we do get this incredible convergence of practices. And I think we have, new kinds of literacies in the culture generally. And I think as these tools become more democratized, we're going to have really good writers learning more about them.
And one of the things that I was doing with my fundamentals, which was well back at the same time, like 2008, was saying, here's the rhetorical moves, here's the semantic meaning behind a link, behind a navigational schema or structure. And I'd love to expand. What we really need is a rhetorical textbook. Here's the possible semantic moves that you can make within XR, within moving from space to space. It doesn't, treasure hunt is great, but that's kind of like narrowing the genre so much. There's so many more things that you could do here. And here's how, and here's a slight example of that particular move.
Yeah, sure.
That'd be way cool to do. It's just fascinating how much you can put into an XR environment. And you're absolutely right. Even going back to the story space, and Stephanie can talk to this as well, you need to think about the whole work in a completely different way. You
Mhm.
need to think about how you're writing, how you're presenting it, what's going on for the reader in so many different ways. In a print book, it's relatively simple, like 1, 2, 3. Every reader's going to go in this arc. But in story space, as you know, and anywhere else in hypertext, it's going to go all over the place. I was going to tell you, my Disappearing Rain was on my living room wall. I think you know this, for like years. And then I had the same thing going on. I had strings everywhere and I had all this stuff on my wall. My mother comes in from having seen the movie A Beautiful Mind and decides that I've got a problem.
I thought it was going to be a serial killer thing.
It's
Like
like, yeah, she
crime scene,
decides
blood
that
splatter
I'm
analysis. Yeah.
definitely in need of a therapist and possibly hospitalization because of what was on my wall. Yeah, I'm glad she didn't walk into your house.
All of our houses, yeah.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, you're absolutely right. You actually need a way of storyboarding that's completely different.
But the other thing too is there's a big difference between creating inside and creating outside. So, I mean, you know, in the
Yes.
early days, I remember actually going to the Brown Cave, and what was really interesting was I think the process of getting like the writers to the programmers to the cave, then back, like there was no rapid iteration. It was like a 2-week process. So if you're not close to being able to have the tools to create, you actually are further away from being able to inform forms. You don't actually learn much about exactly how it works. You learn what you don't like because you're kind of already having your original ideas translated. I really think that as tools become easier, and that when you are inside, say VR, there isn't this kind of, you know, oh, I wish I could go to a textbook to see what works. You can start to write. The piece I didn't get to show was actually part of the ELO mentoring exhibition, and it involved an artist from our lab, but they were inside Multibrush, and my daughter and the artist in residence, importing text and then actively drawing around it and talking about it and creating an entire like VR story world. And then you get to a really interesting thing, right? Because it is actually the creative process of making, like, this is actually an activity like gaming, but it's also a product. But I also find it really fascinating because then you have not just rapid iteration, but instant. You can figure out how you're going to draw. So who knows what the next generation of tools that will involve, but that's definitely, as expressive tools change, we will have new insights into what we can make. And yeah, it'll be very cool. And the AI stuff, like I spent 2 years trying to shift the Reddit database. Like we tried, I mean, the database is so large. So part of the thing is, we can try to move these AI generators from Western storytelling structures. And it's so difficult, but it also doesn't mean that you can't, these are also moments where we realize what the underlying stuff really is.
Yeah. And it's so cool to have in the room when they were introducing each other, the software engineers who are going to be developing that next generation. And maybe we can possibly say, hey guys, think about this. But I think that immediate collaboration is so important. And you're able to do it now, which is, yeah, you're rather than a 2-week delay that was in $1 million lab. And that's one of the things too now is you've got access. How many people can use DALL-E and all of these tools? And now, before, you would have had to have gone to Brown, you would have had to have a scholarship, and now you can just go online and do it. It is a brave new world.
Is there a good tutorial anywhere for crafting prompts for Stable Diffusion?
I don't know for
Do you
Stable
recommend-
Diffusion. I've seen a couple of people doing them for Midjourney. I'm sure you could find them. I mean, there are a number of people are sharing a lot more, and that's what's also interesting. Like the community is really interesting, even over like the last couple of months. Like Midjourney starts and it's invitation only, and there's like a whole like you create this whole like desiring machine. Like maybe you'll get on. You have to be on the Facebook group for Midjourney, and sometimes people are giving out like so. If you have a model of scarcity, then you have everybody not sharing their prompts and just sharing their art. Then there's this predictable discussion around, is it art or not? And then now we're out the other side where everyone's like, here are my cool things. All the prompts are in the comments. Here is how I'm doing my prompts. And now you are actually at the level of like prompt critique, where people are like, do you really need to have like the, 16:9 identified or the camera thing? So, and I think that's the cycle, just how fast that's been has been really amazing. Like in 6 weeks, you go from like this one thing to, so I wouldn't be surprised there are tons of prompt books. The Stable Diffusion community is more interesting though in a way because everybody's wanted to do it themselves and kind of run around the censorship of places like Midjourney and Dolly. So but yeah, there's a lot more prompt sharing. I don't know it offhand, but if Midjourney has it, then Stable Diffusion will.
Do you have those? I found the links for Dolly. Do you have the link for Stable Diffusion? Oh, okay. Yeah, this is just an amazing world, and I've just first seen the Midjourney, and there are already like 2.7 million members in what, 6 weeks?
Well, longer than that, but it's definitely exploded
okay.
now that everybody can just, yeah.
Now that everybody, yeah, that's just incredible. And it looks like it opens up in Discord, so that's really amazing.
Well, and some of the cool things, I forget where, so I don't know if Amy must be at coffee, but I know that through Kate's lab, we were introduced to Charisma AI, which is a UK-based private sector company. And I have a graduate student who is working kind of intimately to, they have GPT-3 under the hood. And you can pull in GPT-3, and my student Michaela is working to, it connects right to the Unreal Engine. So you have a pipeline there from GPT-3 through character generation in Charisma AI into Unreal Engines for use in a virtual reality headset. So now you can put on the headset and just interact with characters with GPT-3 under the hood, and pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because then as a writer, you're creating scenarios rather than creating 100% of the text.
So that would be the AI text generator. So then you'd be the writer AI partnership.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to be restarting in a few seconds with Fabienne, who's somewhere. We also have one more person new in the room, and we have two here. I'm going to introduce you first, David. Dave Miller was my supervisor for my PhD, without which I wouldn't even have come close to submitting a thesis. So I will request that everybody be really nice while he's here. Anything else you'd like to say to introduce yourself, Dave?
Thanks, Freda. Just pleased I could join you today, and nice to see everyone. And thank you very much for Caitlin for the really interesting presentation. I managed to catch most of that, so thank you.
Wonderful. And then we have Arya Nicholas. Is that? No, sorry, you're going to have to pronounce it properly, and I will learn. Would you like to say hi?
Yeah, hello.
Hello. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly? Oh, sorry, everyone. We've started. We're doing brief introductions. Dave Miller just said hi. Mark and I pay our respects to Dave. Lorenzo, can you get the guys in the corner to be shushed? Okay, guys are being shushed. Yeah, Arya, please introduce yourself briefly.
Oh, well, my name's Arya Nicholas. I actually work in the ELL with Dini Gregar. I also work in the game industry as well as a professional game developer. So I'm really interested in hearing a lot more about VR. That's kind of why I kind of joined in and am listening in now.
Thank you very much. And Carl has been here for a while, but he arrived in the middle of a session. So did Stephanie. Carl, could you introduce yourself and then Stephanie, please?
I am in the DC area. I work for the federal government addressing accessibility issues for people with disabilities. So really fascinating with VR, and there's actually a whole community that I want to bridge to make some more connections.
Thank you, Carl. And there were so many introductions earlier. I want to make sure I didn't miss any. Matthias, you introduced yourself, right? But Stephanie, I don't think you did. Would you mind saying hello and introducing yourself?
I'm a member of the, I'm on the board of the Electronic Literature Organization, and I've been interested in it since 1995 or so. And I'm not using my video because I'm still in bed here doing this.
No, that's fine.
And an excellent poet as well.
So true.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Gerard. I think that you saw the people that I work are FoT. Paul yesterday presented our interface, that it's like a special canvas where you can play with different AI agents. And what I'm really interested is in exploring different interfaces to interact with these AR-powered tools, especially when we give agency to these AIs, how we can communicate our intention and we can manifest really what we want and make the AIs respond as we expect, especially this. Thank you.